And we're back. Thanks for joining us for another edition of So What, Who Cares, where we've been parsing recent BLS jobs reports to tell you how it will affect talent acquisition and the greater economy as a whole. All right, Ron, thank you for joining us again for this follow-up edition to the March jobs report. We're calling this the April jobs report edition of So What, Who Cares. Ron's joining us again from his home in Jacksonville, Florida. Welcome back.
Nice to be here.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it last time.
Yeah, it was great. Hey, since we last talked, I heard a piece of trivia about Jacksonville. I heard that Jacksonville, Florida has never been at 100 degrees or higher. Is that true?
Yeah, I never thought about it. It gets really, really hot. Yeah. With the humidity, it's like 1,000,000. But maybe you're right. We never hit 100 actual degrees. I don't know.
I just saw that the other day. We'll have to have our fact checkers check that out before this episode goes live. So,
good question.
Yeah. So last time you were here, we were talking about the March jobs report. It was a crazy number, 700,000+ jobs added to the U.S. economy in 1 month. It was this huge difference from where we were a year ago. There were more jobs than there were people. I think it was like 1.1 jobs posted for every person in the workforce. And we thought, hey, it's starting. The rebound is starting in the economy. After the call, you and I said, man, this is going to be crazy to talk about how big it is next month. We're going to get 1 million jobs next month. So what actually happened, Ron?
Yeah. So there's simply no way around. We went there last month, but now it's just so utterly blatant. And it's very nice to actually see people talking about it in the press a lot more. Mm-hmm. If you look at what happened last month, so, we know right now that the country has more job openings than its entire history, 8.1 million.
Yeah. And
when you watch what happened, we gained 266,000 jobs. Now, that's coming from a household survey. Now, I will tell you, I have an email proof of this. On Tuesday of that week, I emailed an associate of mine, and I said, I just can't see how we could possibly come in more than 400 to 500,000. And she said, well, everybody's saying like 1 million to 2 million. And I'm like, but we haven't terminated any of the programs that would put people back to work, which is requiring proof of job search, ending some of these extended unemployment benefits, and certainly PUA and PEUC, pandemic unemployment compensation. Those were still all in place. So I was like, if those incentives haven't been taken away, then I don't see how it happens. When the 266 came, I was probably the only person in the country who kind of smiled, because I was like, okay, phew. It's not about being right as much as you're like, I hope I'm not going crazy, because what I see is there's none of those conditions have changed yet. Since that report came out, now it's dire. So now you have, 12 states saying we're going to cut the benefits, 6 months too late, if they're going to do it. And then you have people, I think you had mentioned something from a presidential level, people going, we got to require proof of job search. I know Florida, where I live, said May 30th or June 1st or whatever, they're going to start requiring it once again, about 6 months too late.
Yep.
But it's an engagement issue. So here's what the crazy thing about last month's jobs report. So you have the payroll employment side. So that's the one that went up 266,000. If you go to the unemployment side, the household survey side, you actually see things. Right. If you go to college degree, the amount of unemployed people for people with even an associate's degree or college degree, that number fell. So these people are, increasingly going back to work. But if you look at the ones without a degree, the amount of people unemployed, actually, that number went up. But yet, millions and millions of the job openings we have right now are actually targeted to that population. So to see that number swell at a time when we absolutely desperately needed them actually kind of reinforces the fact that people were making this one last ditch effort, maybe coming out of not being in the labor force, coming in to try to secure that. So it's just, it was just an incredible dynamic to watch take place, that we have never, ever more desperately needed people, and yet that unemployed number kind of swelled a little bit, which I know caught a lot of people by surprise, but it shouldn't have.
And one of the other things that I noticed too is that there was some, as there always is, some adjustment to previous numbers. They actually adjusted February up a little bit. March went down some. I forget what it was, a little bit. Yeah. But they saw that maybe their numbers weren't totally right, which is pretty normal. The thing that kind of surprised me was always before the monthly job report, we have ADP giving us their job report. And I don't know that I've ever seen ADP's diverge so far from BLS before. The ADP job report said that private employers are going to add 742,000 jobs. I'm not saying that they're wrong, because apparently their system says they added that. What are we missing?
Yeah, I think there's several factors at play. So the first one, I will tell you, I came up with my number of what I thought was going to happen. I saw the ADP report and I'm like, oh man, now I look like a fool. I just got done sending this email. But you have to understand something. ADP is a payroll processing company. So they really deal largely with, large organizations. And where we're seeing a lot of the pain are in these, it's a lot of restaurants and smaller establishments that wouldn't be, ADP customers. This can happen at certain times. Yeah. And an article just came out this past week that small companies in particular are just absolutely dying. They can't find people. And unlike large companies that, may be able to raise wages and try to entice people back, it's almost impossible for your mom and pop restaurant or retail store to react to a market situation and try to jump their wages. I mean, they'll put themselves out of their own home if they try to do that. It takes a while for price to adjust when you set new price in. So I think a lot of what you're seeing here is that there was a drag that was occurring that ADP just missed the drag while kind of overemphasizing the bits of strength that we're having. And I would say this, I started with we know that people above at least an associate's degree and higher, we know that their number of unemployed did take a dip. So we know that they were probably returning to work in earnest. Those people are definitely going to be represented in those ADP counts. What you're missing is, once again, that lower end worker is probably not going to show up in there just by the nature of those companies probably wouldn't be using.
Yeah, and so you referenced with the NFIB article and also CPI and PPI that came out, that consumer price index and the price parity going up. How is this going to, are we kicking into inflation mode? What's happening? Is this just a blip?
So huge. If you look at the CPI, remove food and energy, because energy can always put you on a little bit of a spin.
Yeah.
If you look at that line, it kind of goes like this, and every now and then it kind of jumps up and everything again. Last month, it turned, and it looks like a straight line up into the sky. And this is where you got to be careful. Trickery. I tweeted about, I don't know if I talked about this. I was on LinkedIn. It was a conversation because somebody was saying, hey, we can't be in wage inflation right now because earnings aren't going up. And if you look at the real earnings report, real earnings were flat. And then you go into the detail, and real earnings were up by 0.7 percentage points, which is an enormous number. But they were offset by this 0.8% increase in CPI. So it's a real earnings. So it has to take into account price. So like earnings, of course, are taking off into the sky because we had all of that money thrown into this economy at people who already had jobs or were collecting a lot of benefits to offset their job. So you have all of that. So, of course, as these earnings are going up, they're being offset by these price increases as well. And I think that is an incredibly important dynamic because there are people who, may make a conversation around, hey, this is going to be a correction for us. Finally, low-paying jobs are going to, come up to where the market's at. And I think it's a really incredibly dangerous thing because what allowed people to do these types of things, to spend and drive inflation up, was the fact that we so overinflated things. So there's a real kind of false sense of what value is. Yeah. And my fear in all of this is that when the dust settles, no matter how much wages come up, we just set a new floor, and then that new floor is now a lot higher number than it was, which will drive, once again, kind of the mom and pop employers, I think, into a more precarious situation. When you're trying to combat, certainly the large companies, the Amazon and things, who are publicly saying, like, look, we have to have people $15, $18, $20 an hour. Like, it's just so hard to keep up with those people. But even they don't understand why they're not getting people. It's because they're competing against this kind of offset, this government offset. When the government offset is corrected, I think we'll see the dust settle a little bit, and then it'll take the market time to find its equilibrium. But you can't ever forget, we had a huge labor shortage before COVID. we have a labor shortage now, absolutely, but we're just going to go back to having a regular labor shortage, not this kind of ridiculous one we're having now, but it's still going to be a labor shortage. Right before COVID hit, all of the sectors had wage inflation hitting them like crazy, and then everything goes wonky last year. I think if you look at the most recent quarters published for fourth quarter, you see a lot of those curves picking back up. I think they'll really spike early this year, and then I think you'll see a flatten, and then it'll be interesting as the market tries to find what equilibrium is.
A lot, good segue there, about QSR food service restaurants, fast food last month. So one of the happy things that happened was that the QSR leisure hospitality added 331,000 jobs last month. People were starting to go back to work in your local, mall, restaurants, whatever. And at about the time we were talking, there was announcements of these huge hiring events from Chipotle and Taco Bell's and everybody in the world. You also see that Chipotle is bumping up their average until June, or from now to June, up to $15 on average. Amazon is raising the rates of 500,000 actual employees. You've got tons of other people saying, here, this is what we're doing. Talk about this idea. Like, what is the new prevailing wage? Is this a de facto minimum wage? There's been a lot of talk about minimum wage, and do we regulate it, or do we just let it happen?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you do see, there's a lot of concern about minimum wage, and let's face it, if you were to look at minimum wage on its surface, if you go to any state and you see a minimum wage, you'd be like, wow, that's just incredibly low. But the reality is so few people ever work minimum wage. And if you actually track that through the years, the percentage of people that actually work minimum wage in a given state is just really kind of fallen away. People, these companies, the Amazons of the world, they do kind of set a precedent. We even talk to our clients about, if you're in an Amazon market, the game's completely different. You can see markets where, they got 2,000 openings and the next company has 20 openings. Like it's an incredible force that happens. And so it takes time for people to kind of correct what they're doing. Do I believe Amazon someday is going to go, okay, that was silly, we're going to decrease our wage? Oh, absolutely not. The problem with wages, and any economist knows, is there's a lot of stickiness. So they go up, and then to get them back down again, you almost have to go through a crisis of epic proportions to pull a wage down, because wages are pretty sticky. So I think what you will see, there was already a lot of localities, a lot of states that had kind of 5-year plans to get their minimum wage up. Those wages that they have, probably they looked out 5 years to. I would bet in most of the states those wages have already been met or surpassed. In a lot of specific locations where there's just a lot of intense pressure. So, I think you are going to see, will we actually be able to record, what's a minimum wage? I think that's not as important as saying, can we at least monitor how many people are earning at this particular level or this particular level or this particular level? And is that evolving over time?
Yeah, and I've even heard a lot of press, a handful of podcasts have been talking about this too. Our friends Chad and Cheese in this industry had talked about minimum wage the other day with an economist. It was very interesting talking about the history of it. Planet Money, the NPR property, did a big deal about it, where they talked about what's the real history from a political perspective as well as a historic perspective, and what should we do? Should we have a minimum wage or not? 50% of the economists said yes, 50% of them said no. But one of the things that somebody said really stuck out and kind of was a kick in the butt maybe a little bit, but I've thought about it a lot, is if you are a company that is operating at the minimum wage today of $7.25 and raising your rates, your labor rates, is going to make you go out of business, do we really want you in the economy anyways? And I thought, that's harsh reality, but probably true at this point. Like, you should have already kind of gotten there.
Sure. I'm going to actually hit this from several different angles. So the first part is, for years, manufacturing companies in the U.S. faced a reality of, we cannot produce things as cheaply as other countries. And, that as a result of that, companies moved out of the U.S. and went to other countries. What's interesting is over time, you see a lot of those companies actually ended up moving back to the U.S. because wage inflation occurs elsewhere. There's also production quality issues. And these people end up kind of coming back. Not all of them, but it's different. Are we hurting in the manufacturing industry? No. Right now,
Sure.
we've got 706,000 job openings in manufacturing, which is the highest in history. Like, this is an industry that's just trying desperately to hire people. This is not an industry that's hurting. There's all kinds of things that happen, these kind of point corrections. I actually agree with the thought of if you aren't able to charge, or you can't pay your people in a way that allows you to kind of stay in business and, you know, do these kind of things, then you don't get workers and things happen. But it's an evolution.
Yeah.
You know, then other companies come in who do, and these things happen. Is it the end of all mom and pop shops? No. Eventually another one comes in and goes, okay, our menu is priced like this. This allows us to pay people at that wage, and then they survive. This is the way things always work. People always want to kind of go, that's it, it's going forever. That's one component. I want to talk about another one, and I mean, it's a little bit of a plug for an article that I just wrote called The Sansdemic Demographic Drought. In that article, we talk about the fact that the whole universe that we know in the developed world is completely changed now. So we had a surplus of workers. So if you go back, let's go way back, 10s, 20s, 30s, 1940s, whatever, you had an enormous supply of low-skilled labor, very little college labor, hitting a market. So that if you think about basic economics, price, demand, equilibrium, the price point could be really low because you had so many people looking for low-end jobs. And then you hit the baby boom, and it starts to evolve. A lot of people are now going to college. You know, a lot of minimum wage was already kind of going into effect. A lot of these things were happening, but you did have two people now in the workforce. It could have been the man, it could have been the woman, but maybe one of them didn't have a college education. But you were dealing with the largest population ever, all in. So you still needed some level of price control because there were just so many people. But that whole thing has completely flipped. So the boomers are all exiting the labor force. There is not a population to back them up. And now the employers are like, we need people, and there isn't anybody out there. Well, welcome to the flip side of this. Now workers are the ones who are, you know, in control of that equation. So it will naturally evolve to companies that are fit, that are really qualified, can really nail things, are going to do well. And then the ones that aren't going to do well. Just like previously, the workers that didn't have any skills or anything, they didn't make any money, they suffered, you know, because there were too many workers. Now it's going to flip to the other side. So I do believe, you know, I'm not a big fan of having control of anything. Government's getting involved with things, but I do understand that there are times that as you go through either demographic changes or as you go through, maybe we've upset the balance a little bit. If you go back to the mortgage, you know, crisis, you know, we were way too permissive on loans. You know, that was a government problem. They were too permissive. A lot of people got loans that shouldn't have. And then we have this crash. So the government came in and kind of bailed out the banks to cover for their own faults and not, you know, being a little bit more prudent about the way they lend. So you have to do things because you already let something get out of control. And I think the way demographics work, but the intentions actually were probably really good. But I think that's going to be an increasingly unnecessary thing going forward. You probably always want that floor because it makes people feel good. But I just think the evolution of just society's disappearing labor force will take care of that, of price going forward. It's crazy stuff to think about.
I read the entire article, Sansdemic, and anybody listening, you check it out. It's crazy. It's super interesting. I'm not going to give the story away, but go to economicmodeling.com, and it's right there on the homepage. You can download it. Can we talk about video games a little bit just before, or is that giving away too much of the report?
No, it's not. It's not. It's actually a segment in there, and if you read the paper, one thing it may not jump out at you is that everything's kind of intertwined. So if I give away how it's all intertwined, then that would be kind of revealing my whole section of the paper. But I do want to talk about...
that'd be too much.
I would call it just this kind of seismic shift in the way people think of work. So if a worker has all the power, so if there's not a lot of workers, so if they have power, then, you know, there's reasons why they have a little bit more power than people think. That's all in the article. About the necessity of working, and we explain why that things have changed in that dynamic. But what's really crazy is that when they studied that, the NBER studied it, the offset and the drop in hours worked, which was a significant drop in hours worked in 2000 to 2015 in prime age men, particularly young men, 21 to 30 years old. when they looked at the drop in hours, it was exactly mirrored by the increase in hours they said they spent playing video games. And you can go follow and laugh at that and go, that's not true and everything.
That's crazy.
But that was a solid study. We know the decline in hours was real, and we know that substitution effect has been real as well. I've heard anecdotal stories of people interviewing and running into the same thing even as they're interviewing. But what's crazy about that is people would say, well, I don't understand how how does video games take men out of the labor force? And it's basically a symptom of the plague. So when they were interviewing these people or asking them about this flip, they're also saying, well, how much have you worked in the past year? And the truth was, a lot of these people were taking weeks off at a time. They were going in between jobs. They were playing their video games on a regular basis. The one thing they weren't doing was working all the time. The other thing in that is they found that 15% of these men, 21 to 30 years old, hadn't worked 1 week the entire previous year. So 50%. Wow. 1 out of 8 of these guys had not worked a single week, 21 to 30 years old. That's so crazy to think about that it's a society that's really kind of, I think, to use a really gross analogy, it's the boiled frog. I think these things have been creeping up over time, but we weren't thinking about it. And instead, everywhere I go, every time I speak on the subject, which I've spoken to a lot of associations and things, people all kind of go, wow, and they're all like, that's funny. And then afterwards, all of these adult, successful business people, in their 50s and 60s come up to me and they go, okay, so my son's still living at home. He's 28, and he says he's in between jobs right now, but he hasn't even looked for work in 6 months. And they're like, am I part of the problem? And I'm like, yes, you're part of the problem. But you're not alone. These surveys don't pick up on 1 or 2 people. They're picking up, broad trends. And I think that this is just, like I said, it's a symptom of the plague of we've allowed, I think, people to take kind of a very hands-off approach to the need to work. And it's something that we are so desperate for people now that, as a society, we've got to figure out a way of addressing that problem.
Huh. Well, I've got a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, and an 11-year-old who play a lot of Fortnite. Am I part of the problem, Ron?
You're not part of the problem.
I do tell them to get out and get a job.
Yeah, my son graduates high school in a couple of weeks, and he's already got his university that he's going to. And believe me, he's going to get a foot to out the door to go to that university because he likes his video games. But you know what? Hey, I'm older and I like my video games, so I'm not gonna sit here and just rag on video games because I actually still play them. But just saying, I don't play them at the expense of work, and that's something we have to be careful.
Right. Yeah. There's often a Friday night that if you go on Fortnite, you'll see the Odell squad, me and the 4 boys, getting rowdy. So shooting it up a little bit.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm more of a solo gamer. I've got my Red Dead Redemption and my Fallout. That's what I play. It's totally it's an escape. But you don't use it to escape from life, forever. It's just meant as a reprieve versus going to the golf course, things like that. But that's the other thing we do talk about in the article is that there are large demographic changes occurring that you can't do anything about. People stopped having babies. Yeah, that's just reality. You can't start having babies and fix the problem because we're done. It's already reversed course. Other countries, it's a very desperate situation.
2 decades
but the problem
behind,
that you have is, in addition to not creating a population, the population that we've created, it's all in the article. If you can look at the graphs, are just not interested in engaging in the labor pool. They're not working, they're not working, they're just not. They're this in another place, and we've never needed people so badly as we do now at a time when they're like, I don't really need to work and I'm not really interested in it. And I think it's just it's a tough situation.
Well, it's great research. It's scary research. But if you have interest, again, go to economicmodeling.com. It is worth the download. So that's about it for us today. Ron, thanks for being with us again. See you a month from now to see what else has happened in the world of labor. Are people coming back? Thanks for being here.
Yeah, really cool things we're going to talk about when it comes to that whole pursuing work. So, it'll be fun.
Very good. See you in a few.